There is something even more dangerous than not studying the Dharma at all, and that is studying it incorrectly. Within the vast ocean of Buddhist scriptures, how much of it is truly the words spoken by the Buddha himself, and how much has been patched together, altered, or added over time by culture, history, or even ignorance? Today, almost anyone can write a few lines with a spiritual flavor and then attach the label, "The Buddha said." Such sayings spread everywhere, carved on stone walls, hung in temples, shared on social media, convincing people to follow them. Some even put their lifelong faith into words that never appeared in the Tripitaka at all. And when false words are chanted daily, while the genuine teachings are forgotten, Buddhism no longer remains a path of awakening. Instead, it becomes a kind of spiritual anesthesia, a religion that feeds the ego under the cover of holiness. So how can we tell what is truly the Buddha's word? How can we avoid falling into delusion, even while walking the path of liberation? This is no longer just the question of scholars or monks. It is a matter of life and death for anyone who truly seeks freedom from suffering. What very few people know is this: throughout 45 years of teaching, the Buddha never wrote down a single line. There exists no original manuscript penned by him, no fixed system of scriptures established during his lifetime. This is completely different from religions founded on official sacred texts, such as Judaism or Christianity. The Buddha taught through spoken words, through dialogues, always adapting his methods to the capacities of each person and the conditions of each situation. Which means that what we call the Buddhist scriptures today are, in fact, records compiled only after his passing, beginning with the very first council at the Saptaparni cave, just a few months after his parinirvana. At that time, it was the great arahants, especially Venerable Ananda, who was renowned for remembering all the discourses, who recited the teachings aloud from memory. And here lies the important point. All of it was preserved orally. For more than a century, there was no written record at all. Only when Buddhism reached Sri Lanka were the teachings first inscribed in writing, in the Pali language, preserved today as the Pali Canon. And so the question arises, how can we trust words that were only remembered months, even years later, without being distorted? A fair question, one that many modern critical thinkers and skeptics have raised. But we must understand this. Those who compiled the scriptures were not ordinary human beings. They were arahants, fully awakened ones, who had completely cut off self-clinging, attained flawless wisdom, and were incapable of falsehood. Their memory was not the memory of an ordinary brain. They did not simply recall words with the intellect. They directly retained the essence of awakening itself, a record that transcends language and remains consistent with reality. Moreover, the process of compilation was not the work of just one individual. It was a collective effort, with each discourse carefully verified among enlightened beings. The principle was clear. Only teachings aligned with the Dhamma, confirmed by many arahants, and consistent with the Buddha's message were preserved. That is why the Pali Canon continues to be regarded as the most reliable source of the Buddha's actual words, a treasury that carries the living voice of awakening across more than 2,000 years. And yet, even up to this very day, we cannot deny a simple truth. Over the centuries, as different schools of Buddhism developed, countless new sutras have appeared. They are often rich in content, complex in structure, and carry strong imprints of local culture and philosophy. But many of these no longer reflect the original spirit of the Buddha's teaching. Instead, they became mixed with Brahmanical thought, Daoist influence, or other strands of Eastern mysticism. Some scriptures are incredibly long, polished, and beautiful in literary style. Yet, if we look carefully, we can see that they add divine powers, cosmic worldviews, and layers of metaphysics, sometimes highly imaginative, sometimes fantastical. And in doing so, they lose the simplicity, the directness, and the experiential quality of the early discourses. That is why the real distinction between authentic and inauthentic teachings cannot be made by counting words, admiring refined language, or following the beliefs of the majority. It must rest on one essential criterion. Does the teaching lead to the end of suffering? Does it point to non-self? Does it help the mind become clear, free, and unbound? The Buddha never asked to be worshipped. He was a guide, one who simply showed the way. His words were never meant to be taken as an absolute truth, to cling to blindly, but as tools. If the tool helps you see reality as it is, if it frees you from suffering, then that is the Dhamma. But if it makes you more fearful, more superstitious, more dependent on prayer and ritual, then even if carved into stone, framed in temples, or repeated in chants, it is not truly the Buddha's word. This is where the honesty of Buddhism lies, not in sanctifying the teaching, but in verifying it through one's own practice. A genuine student of the Dhamma is not one who believes everything written in a book, but one who dares to look directly into the content of a teaching and ask, when I let these words sink into my heart, do they bring clarity? Do they dissolve the ego, or do they feed it? The distinction between true and false scripture cannot be based on presentation, ritual, or the level of respect people assign to it. For over 2,000 years, countless texts have been composed under the name "Thus Spoke the Buddha." And yet, if a practitioner lacks wisdom and self-inquiry, it becomes all too easy to fall into false belief, false practice, and false hope. So, how do we recognize what is truly the Buddha's word? The answer is this. We must rely on certain core principles, not imposed by authority, but verified through personal practice, through inner mindfulness, and through the light of the Dhamma itself. The first principle is the quality of liberation. Every authentic teaching of the Buddha points toward the same goal: the complete ending of suffering, freedom from the cycle of birth and death, the eradication of all mental defilements. Any word, any scripture, that does not lead the mind toward letting go of craving, abandoning hatred, and cutting off ignorance cannot be considered the Buddha's teaching, no matter how lofty its title may sound. On the other hand, if a text stirs up greed, promises wealth, or entices with worldly gains, then it is a diversion. It does not belong to the middle way. The Buddha's words never leave us comfortable in attachment. They always aim directly at the root of suffering, even if the truth feels sharp, even if it is hard to accept. The second principle is the mark of non-self, the absence of clinging. Authentic teachings never strengthen the sense of I or mine. Instead, they dismantle it. They do not build new attachments, they dissolve them. They do not inflate the ego, they expose it as empty. This is the very foundation of all of the Buddha's teachings. To see clearly that the five aggregates are impermanent and without self. To cut through the illusion of I that beings continue to cling to. A genuine sutra must help the practitioner realize that there is no permanent self to defend, no eternal identity to polish, no me to elevate. Any teaching that awakens the feeling of, I am special, I have supernatural powers, I was chosen by the Buddha, such teachings are not extinguishing the ego, but quietly feeding it. And if a scripture encourages us to glorify ourselves, to divide the world into the enlightened few and the ordinary many, in a spirit of superiority, then that is a clear sign of distortion. The Buddha never created a spiritual elite. He pointed only to the path of non-self, where there is no one left to be exalted, and nothing left to grasp. The third principle is direct experience, not fantasy. The Buddha's words always encourage the listener to see for themselves, to test for themselves, to realize for themselves. He never asked for blind belief. So if a sutra is filled with metaphysical imagery, shimmering heavens, mysterious realms, invisible forces, where the practitioner can only believe but never directly verify, then that sutra is leading the mind toward superstition. It no longer carries the experimental spirit of the Dhamma. The Buddha did not deny the existence of realms, but he never placed emphasis on knowing them in detail. Quite the opposite. What he repeated again and again was to see clearly here and now in this body, in this breath, in this very contact with the present moment. That is the true path to awakening. His words did not need fantasy to be attractive. It was their simplicity, their sharpness, and their uncompromising wisdom that made them timeless. These three principles are not meant to confine the student of Buddhism into a rigid doctrine. They are a compass to keep us from getting lost. They prevent us from worshiping language, from chasing after glittering illusions, and from losing the spirit of freedom in practice. Because in Buddhism, no scripture is more sacred than the awakened mind itself. If a teaching helps you pause, turn inward, and let go of ego, that is a teaching worth keeping. But if it sends you outward, waiting for some external power to rescue you, then no matter how many times you repeat it, it will not lead you to freedom. One of the most direct ways to recognize a false scripture is to look at the psychological result it creates in the reader. If a text increases fear, if it fuels the urge for rituals, or deepens attachment to a particular form of belief, then we must ask honestly, does this still reflect the spirit of the Buddha? Take, for example, a very common idea in modern Buddhism, the notion of karmic creditors, spirits from past lives demanding repayment. This concept does not appear in the early discourses. Yet it is often used today to explain misfortune, illness, poverty, or bad luck. People are then told that the solution is to hold ceremonies, make offerings, chant specific texts, or even hire monks to chant on their behalf, in the hope that these spirits will forgive them, that their past karma will somehow be erased. It sounds compassionate. It even carries a sense of karmic justice. But in reality, such practices trap people in dependency. Instead of facing their karma directly, they begin bargaining with the past through rituals, through money, through external acts. This is not awakening. This is fear, wearing the mask of compassion. Another example is the ritual of star offerings, or astrological appeasement ceremonies meant to counteract bad luck based on planetary positions. These originate from folk beliefs and Eastern astrology, not from the Buddha's teaching. In the Nikayas and the Agamas, there is not a single discourse where the Buddha says human life is controlled by the stars, or that rituals can dissolve their influence. What the Buddha did say, again and again, is that everything we encounter is the result of body, speech, and mind, our actions in the past and in the present. Without understanding karma correctly, people will blame fate and then look for ways to bribe fortune. That is not the Dhamma. That is not freedom. Instead of turning inward to adjust their own behavior, speech, and thoughts, many who claim to follow the Buddha still take part in rituals without realizing that they are being pulled away from the noble path. Take, for example, the practice of burning paper money, paper cars, paper houses, or other paper goods for the dead, done with the belief that such items will be sent for use in the afterlife. This is the product of folk culture, heavily influenced by Daoism and Confucianism in China. It has never appeared in any teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha taught that once death comes, no one retains property to receive or to use. Burning paper goods does nothing for the deceased. What it does, instead, is reinforce an illusion for the living that somehow they can continue to provide for the other world. In truth, this weakens the spirit of letting go, and it diminishes the practice of mindfulness here and now. Today, there are even many modern texts written in flowery prose, decorated with images, presented with mystical tones, but the content quietly feeds the spiritual ego. Some verses promise that if you chant a mantra exactly 108 times, you will be liberated. Others claim that reciting a certain text will guarantee the protection of bodhisattvas. Others suggest that practicing a certain ritual will open the third eye and grant supernatural powers. All of these stand far apart from the spirit of the Buddha's words. The Buddha never encouraged the pursuit of psychic powers. He never declared that freedom would come after reciting a text a certain number of times. He never offered spiritual powers as a prize for anyone. And yet, such teachings can make readers feel chosen, special, or on a mystical path to spiritual power. But remember, any path that makes the ego grow, no matter how spiritual it looks, is a wrong path. Awakening is not a weapon to display. It is not a gift handed out by divine beings. It is the fruit of mindfulness, letting go, and insight into the heart moment by moment. That is why, when standing before any scripture, whether short or long, ancient or modern, the practitioner must ask a deep question. Does this text lead me to let go or to cling? Does it lead me toward awakening or toward fear, toward non-self or toward spiritual pride? If the words help you lighten your heart, release grasping, dwell in peace, and stop searching for something outside of the present moment, then, even if the text is obscure, it is pointing toward the noble path. But if the words make you anxious, fearful of karma, or hurriedly practicing in order to achieve some special spiritual status, then pause, because you may be chanting a scripture the Buddha never spoke. The Buddha left us with one radical teaching not just for religion, but for the human mind itself. He said, "Do not believe simply because it has been passed down. Do not believe because it is tradition. Do not believe because it is written in scriptures. Do not believe because the speaker is your teacher. Observe for yourself." And if those words lead to compassion, to letting go, to freedom from craving and hatred, if they lead to wisdom, peace, and liberation, then yes, you should believe and practice them. With this single statement, the Buddha swept away all of humanity's spiritual crutches, the prestige of the teacher, the authority of tradition, the status of scripture, the pressure of the collective. All of it was set aside. In their place, he returned the full responsibility to each person's awakened wisdom. There was no room left for blindness, no room left for dependence. The student of the path was not encouraged to ask, "Whom should I trust?" but instead, "What do I see for myself in my own life?" This spirit was not only philosophical, it was a cultural revolution. It ran directly against the customs of ancient India, where the teacher's word was supreme, where the Vedas were seen as eternal truth, and where faith was bound by ritual and caste. By teaching that each person must be a lamp unto themselves, the Buddha gave humanity back the one thing that almost no religious system at the time dared to admit: inner freedom. The image of the lamp is not a vague metaphor. It is a precise instruction. It points directly to the practice of mindfulness, of observation, of unceasing self-inquiry. Do not wait for someone to shine the light on you. Do not expect a master, a Buddha, or any divine power to do for you what only you can do. The only path is to light the lamp within yourself and to walk through the darkness of ignorance with that very light. This is not a comfortable journey, for the lamp does not soothe or flatter, it exposes. It will shine on every shadow of the ego, every habit of ignorance, every mask you have worn across lifetimes. So when you hold a scripture in your hands, the first question is not, who said these words? The first question is, do these words make the lamp within me shine brighter, or do they make me more dependent? If the words turn you inward, helping you face suffering rather than run from it, helping you release rather than accumulate, then that is the true light. But if they make you seek power outside yourself, chase after the unseen, or depend on some external force, then even if the text is ancient, even if it carries the label, the Buddha said, it is still only a false lamp. The words of the Buddha never came to create believers. They came to awaken the awakened, to stir those still asleep, and to return to each person the ultimate freedom of spirit. And that freedom is not the license to do whatever you want. It is the freedom from illusion itself, even illusions cloaked in religious robes. The Buddha did not need you to believe in him. That is the most extraordinary thing about a true awakened one. He only needed you to see reality as it is right here, right now, within yourself. Right here, right now, you can step out of suffering with your own awakened feet. To discern, to filter carefully, this is not only a necessary skill in today's age of overwhelming information, but also a profound expression of spiritual wisdom. If a seeker of the Dharma cannot distinguish, cannot separate muddy water from clear water, then no matter how many scriptures they read, they will not escape suffering. On the other hand, the one who shines awareness onto every word, who reads with mindfulness, then even without studying much, can still walk steadily on the path of awakening. Believing in the Buddha's words is a good starting point, but it is not the ultimate goal. The Buddha never once called for personal worship. He never demanded that disciples be loyal to every single letter of scripture. He asked only one thing, that the teachings be tested and experienced directly in the practitioner's own heart. If they are not, then no matter how beautiful the words may sound, they are nothing more than echoes outside, unable to light the flame within. It is a mistake to think that true scriptures are those that are the oldest, the longest, or the ones preserved by the largest schools of Buddhism. It is also a mistake to believe that the scriptures most printed, most recited, or carved into stone in the grandest temples are automatically truth. The real scriptures, if we can call them that, are those words that have the power to illuminate reality in the heart of the reader. The words that allow you to see that suffering does not come from circumstance, but from clinging. The words that show you there is no self to preserve, no spiritual achievement, to display only a stream of awareness, growing brighter with each moment of contemplation. True scripture is not found on paper. It is found in the state of a mind that is no longer afraid, no longer craving, no longer judging, no longer striving to become anyone at all, but simply present, fully alive in this very moment. If you read a scripture and feel peace, not because you are promised something, but because you see truth directly, then that word has fulfilled its role. But if reading makes you feel higher than others, makes you believe you hold a special practice, or that you have been chosen to awaken, then beware. That might only be a beautiful mask that the ego has borrowed from scripture to clothe itself. Sacred texts cannot save anyone without wisdom. Even the Buddha himself cannot save a person who refuses to look within. In the spiritual journey, to say no is also a form of awakening. Saying no to blind faith. Saying no to unconscious repetition. Saying no to easy paths that lead away from truth. And only when we dare to refuse what is false, do we open the chance to touch what is most real. Not from scriptures, not from another, but from deep, silent mindfulness within. There is a truth not everyone has the courage to accept. Even authentic scriptures, the true words of the Buddha, hold no power to end suffering if the reader still clings to their old mind. The Buddha's words have no magic. No one can read a few lines and instantly change karma, erase sins, or gain enlightenment. Those words are only a map. The journey still belongs to each of us. A scripture, no matter how pure, if chanted like a habit, a ritual, or a tool for safety, remains just sound passing through the ear without leaving a trace. The Buddha's wisdom does not lie in sound or letters. It lies in the state of awareness that those words awaken in the listener. If one sentence stops your mind, lets you see illusions clearly, recognize impermanence, that sentence is alive. That sentence is the Dharma. But if you read an entire book of scriptures and still crave, still cling, still think, I am progressing, then all of it remains only knowledge piled up, like heavy stones tied to your feet. The paradox is this: the more tightly one clings to scriptures, the easier it is to drift away from their true spirit. Because the Buddha's words were never meant to be worshipped. They were meant to be released. He never taught anyone to hold onto his words like dogma. On the contrary, he often reminded us, even the Dharma must be let go of. How much more so, what is not the Dharma? So, when scriptures become tools to assert oneself, to argue right and wrong, or to show off knowledge, they have already been betrayed within the reader's own heart. To understand this is to see that distinguishing between true and false scripture is important, yes, but not as important as being able to let go of both. Because the essence of the path is not in the correctness of the words, but in whether the listener's mind is still clouded or already awake. A wrong word, if it brings someone back to mindfulness, can become skillful means. A right word, if it makes someone arrogant or lost in spiritual fantasies, is nothing but a thorn on the road to liberation. In the end, the most important thing is not how many scriptures you have read, how many words you can recite, or how many you can label true or false. It is, how has your mind changed after each encounter with a teaching? If, after some time on the path, you find yourself lighter with life, less judgmental, less fearful, more patient, more forgiving, then even a few lines of scripture may transform an entire lifetime. But if the more you study, the more rigid you become, the more attached to rituals, the more you chase mystical promises, then perhaps you have already wandered away from the path the Buddha once pointed to. Awakening does not lie in scriptures. Awakening lies in letting go. And sometimes, letting go of even a right word is the very first step to see a deeper truth. We are not here to hand you a final answer. We are here to remind you that the truest answer always lies within you. Only the light of awareness in each passing moment is living scripture. That is the Dharma present, alive. And if one day you no longer need any teaching at all, because you yourself have become the teacher, then perhaps you have reached the deepest meaning of what true scripture island. At that point, you are no longer reading scripture. You are living scripture. And all sounds may fall silent, because the Dharma has already spoken.